আমাদের শুরু হবে। সো আমরা আমাদের এই সেশনের যিনি চেয়ার স্যার প্রফেসর সৈয়দ আব্দুল হাফিজ মঈনুদ্দিন স্যারকে অনুরোধ করব আমাদের ক্লাসে আসার জন্য। এবং আজকের আমাদের স্পিকার ডক্টর শেখ সাগির আলী, অ্যাসিস্ট্যান্ট প্রফেসর অফ ইংলিশ, মিদনাপুর কলেজ, স্যারকে অনুরোধ করব ক্লাসে আসার জন্য। প্রোগ্রামকে আমি মইনুদ্দিন স্যার সম্পর্কে স্যার একটা ছোট ইন্ট্রোডাকশন দিয়ে দিই। Professor Syed Abdul Hafiz Moinuddin is a prominent Indian academic, a professor in the Department of Sociology at Vidyasagar University in Midnapore, West Bengal, India. He has been listed as a subject expert and course editor for self-learning materials at Netaji Subhas University, and is also affiliated with the University of Calcutta Sociology Department as an expert. Professor Moinuddin's research interests lie primarily within the field of sociology, with a focus on gender studies, minority studies, development studies. He has supervised numerous PhD candidates and published research on a variety of topics, including divorce and separation among Muslims in West Bengal, healthcare of elderly tribes, and the educational situation of Muslims in India. আমি স্যারকে অনুরোধ করব স্পিকারকে ইন্ট্রোডিউস করার জন্য।
Assistant Professor at the Department of English, Midnapore College. He will deliver a lecture on muted voices and the minority condition, situating Bengali Muslims in state back, state on. Short stories by Bengali Muslim writers. We will discuss with some writings of eminent Bengali writer Mustafa Siraj and others, and then their novel. Mr. Sagir Ali, Sheikh Sagir Ali, published a number of books in national and international journal. He edited books, Religion in South Asian and Anglophone Literature, Traversing Resistance, Margins and Extremism, published by Rowledge in 2021. Literature and Theory, Contemporary Signpost and Critical Surveys, Rowledge 2022. War on Terror, Nation, Democracy, Liberalization, Rowledge 2023. Writing Disaster in South Asian Literature and Culture, The Limits of Empathy and Cosmopolitan Imagination, Rauman and Littlefield 2024, and Marginal Narratives and the Question of Human Rights in Asian Specific Literature, published in famous journal Springer Nature, published in 2024. His articles appear in journals of repute such as South Asia, Journal of South Asian Studies, Wasafiri, European Journal of English Studies, Journal of Global Postcolonial Studies from the University of Florida Press, etc. যে কথা আমার আগের বক্তা বলছিলেন, সংকট বিপন্নতা বোঝবার প্রয়োজনে সাহিত্যের প্রয়োজনীয়তা। প্রফেসর সাগির সেই সাহিত্য নিয়ে কয়েকটা, অগুলো তো সম্ভব নয়, উনি মূল্যায়ন করার চেষ্টা করবেন, তার বক্তব্য উপস্থাপনা করবেন। I request Professor Sagir to deliver his lecture. Thank you.
The title of my lecture is Muted Voices and the Minority Condition. Especially I'm inviting and I'm discussing stories from the first ever anthology of translations of the stories by Bengali Muslim writers. This book was edited by Tirtha Haldar. She is a professor of comparative literature at the Jadavpur University. And the name of this book is State Back, State Off, short story by Bengali Muslim writers. There are several, almost 19 stories are there. So for the time constant, I'm not taking all of these, but I'm trying to take almost 9 stories so that I can pick up the crucibles of these stories. So the thing is that I want to foreground the silence and the muteness as generative motives, and how this silence and muteness work in these stories, and how whether Muslims are how Muslims use or the stories and the Muslims side by side, they stay side by side, and how much these are silence, the poetics of silence and the waves of invisibility, they intersect with the sensory overload. And the question pertinent to silence is there. I'll begin with my lecture with the story called "In Whose Name the Cow is Slaughtered." In Bangla, it is called Gogno. It was translated into English, and it was rewritten the title as "In Whose Name the Cow is Slaughtered." So in summary, if I call the story, it's a story of religious devotion and communal harmony. Here we get 2 or 3 characters are there. Harai is a very soft-hearted, devout Muslim man in the middle age, and he promised Charu Master to give some amounts of rice and sabji for his daughter's marriage. And this act fulfills the hope, the farj, the hope that during a familial disparition, accompanied by his faithful bullocks, Dhana and Mana, both of their names, Harai cart creaks along the muddy paths, and somehow these bullocks, 2 of them died out of some impoverished existence, an impoverished condition. When Dhana falls ill after breathing some contaminated fodder and some other reasons, we can see that some people, especially the person like Porimol Vidwan, who is a local healer who prescribes some herbal medicines, and Harai somehow invokes the divine intervention by reading Dua Ganjal Aras, and we can see somehow the bullocks his condition worsens. And the local traders like Diljan, he prescribed him to offer some sacrifice for the sake of Allah, because before getting dead it would be better to give it a good sacrifice, kurbani. So this is the story in brief. Here we can see some patterns of the story is that the story bridges Hindu-Muslim wars, the Charu's generosity versus Harai's dietary scruples, because Harai is a very pious human being and is a middle-aged village person. And though he believes in Bengal's syncretic harmony, but somehow he suffers from some dietary scruples. Next slide. So if we go to the ethics of witnessing here in this story, in terms of Jill Bennett, that Jill Bennett using the book called Empathetic Vision, Affect, Trauma and Contemporary Art, published in 2005. Here we can see that this theory was rather elaborated by E. N. Kaplan. So we can see the poiesis. What is mean the poiesis? The creative act of making with the ethics, that how artistic or literary reproduction of silence actively constructed moral testimonies to historical and personal traumas. So here in this story, we can see that the witnessing is not an silent or passive observation, but a performative ethics that or where the unspeakable, I mean the bullocks, often rooted in violence or the social marginalization like his master, all of them are conveyed through the embodied and mute forms that compel the audience to co-create the meaning. I mean, the audience come into the being of in this meaning-making process. So in this story, poetics is vividly operationalized where Harai's ritual slaughter of his bullock Dhana culminates not in cathartic outcry, rather in a protracted wordless delay or wordless procession of homeward when his master, though in terms he is not master because this man Harai calls his bullock Beta or some Sona in such a way. So poetically archiving this violence inflicted on rural Muslim men's bodies by likelihood of colonial eras land economics and a post-colonial poverty. So here the witnessing of the erasure of the indigenous labor bonds, I mean the man-animal as familiar, transforming the mute endurance and ethical demand on readers to recognize the slow violence that Rob Nixon in his book speaks about, the slow violence and the environmentalism of the poor in 2011. Next slide, please. So here we can see that the post-slaughter silence during his footwear towards home poetically testifies the social erasure of rural Bengal or rural Muslims laborers, whose bonds with animals like Dhana and Mana are violently severed by the economic desperation. If I take the example of Agamben's Musalman is not a regular term, rather it's a kind of slang during the time of invisibility. I mean when Agamben writes it in Italian philosopher Agamben writes it in 1999, Remnants of Auschwitz in the book. He speaks about the Musalman, the camp's Musalman, the apathetic non-man, apathetic non-human or non-male. So here the embodying bare life, I mean Joe over bios, invisible through sovereign biopolitics, and this biopolitics strips the humanity. So we all know that about Homo sacer and how Western politics has intervened the distinction that the meaningful citizen like the mere Joe and the Joe over bios dynamic is not evaporating the so-called superior about the hegemonic capture. Rather, here in this story, the Musalman, what Agamben adopts from Primo Levi, is a kind of slang, serves the starkest emblem of reduction. So here the story's wave of invisibility as a rural, poor, middle-class man and extends this intersectionality linking caste hierarchies, neurodiversity, sensory overload because it was raining when he returns home. So Harai Musalmanizes himself or Musalmanizes post-slaughter his sensory overload, rain, mud, flute echoes, Charu Master's flute, all this weaving caste erasure, and we can call the described we can equate this with the concentration camps living dead figures reduced to bare light through total passivity and invisibility. So Harai's post-Qurban desolation, his yokeless trading like a Musalman-like neutralization amid monsoon overload, weaving a gendered labor loss or the invisibility. Next slide, please. In my next story, I like to relate this silence of the mute days with another story that should mark out of Sagar event. Sagor Dipir Mohajon. Sagor Dip in Bangla is called Sagor Dipir Mohajon, written by Abdul Jabbar. Here we can see the tapestry of adventure, peril, mangrove forest, and the Hindu-Muslim unity somehow, and the faith versus pragmatism. So the story opens in the Hooghly River, where we can see the the main protagonist Turaf Rafadan. He is a Hazi and pious person, black mark on his forehead, and he has some calculative piety. Whenever he was a very poor man, I'm trying to speak about his modest inheritance from a tin heart and a boat. He has built an empire of 2-story brick house, 17 acres land. Got it? So somehow we can see his expedition towards the mangrove forest, Sundarban, in Sundarban, and with his partner Arjun Koyal. He is also called Sedo, the forest guide, because we also hear the stories of his father's another Koyal, his father who speaks that Sedo says that tigers fall at his feet and tame like cats after invoking the goddess. So here the invoking of the Badarpir and Bonodevi Ma, Bab Bodorgaji, Rai Dokhin Rai, all these invocations are there only to bring about the coexistence. But what I said earlier at that, next slide please, the coexistence of Hindu-Muslim somehow takes a toll under the calculative piety of this Turaf Rafadan, because Turaf Rafadan sacrifices the life of this Arjun Koyal during the killing of this man, because he has to make some profit into this venture and from this venture. So here we can see the blended worship as a collective protection. All of them, Hindu, Muslim, all of them, they they take some adventure and they invoke gods and goddesses, and irrespective of caste, class and gender. And here, in essence, Hindu-Muslim coexistence is organic. Is organic in terms that ritual hybridize, labor integration, and the so-called all of them call jungle is our mother. Jungle is our mother, and we tame jungle by worshipping her. So here, the writer Jabbar masterfully contrasts the Arjun's animistic faith. Arjun Kayal. He is the Sedo guide. Arjun Kayal's animistic faith with the Turaf Rafadan's calculated piety. Because though Turaf Rafadan invokes Almighty Allah's grace, recites Quran, listens Quranic and Hadith in radio, but somehow he is somehow calculating regarding his prophet. So Turaf's silence extends syncretic communication, has bridge between Islamic devotion and the Sundarban's animistic pluralism. And this underscores the marginal Muslim identity in Bengal's fluid cultural tapestry. So Turaf's faith offers no divine intervention. Turaf's faith offers no divine intervention, only fatalistic quietude that is similar to Islamic eschatology, acceptance of qadar, fate, Kapale Jaj. So silence here in the narrative indicates the asymmetric personal post-colonial exploitation. One character in the story, he speaks that the bastard Mahajan more beastly than the tiger. So this fractures the complicity echoing the story's syncretic invocations. And ultimately, silence here is not mere absence or the haunting agency, but is not an absence, rather a haunting agency, and it critiques how economic indenture and environmental sublime conspire to mute subaltern's howling. Next slide, please. So we also, yes, if I take these two late modernism's planetary term, then we can see that it's a critical shift of modernist studies that broadens the scope of Euro-Americans' experimental to a global interconnected framework that emphasizes how empire, decolonization, and migration, all these things create planetary scales of fragmentation and alienation. So here in this story, the merchant of Sagar Island, Sagar Dipir Maji, where Sundarban's tidal wilderness and Tura Prapadan's silent ledger of lost lives planetarizes modernist themes of existential drift. I mean, the mangroves ecological sublime, blending Hindu-Muslim rituals against the tiger perils, marginalizes Bengal's timber workers in a decolonized modernist canvas that echoes global imperial extractions. Another thing is that, no, that's right. Yes. I use relational poetics of silence. That is a famous term used by Jack Ranasian, mute speech, in the book called Mute Speech, Literature, Critical Theory and Politics, Relational Poetics, where silence redistributes the partition of the sensible in terms that the aesthetic regime that dictates what is perceptible and sayable, that elevates mute entities, I mean bodies, objects, landscapes, as ethical agents in egalitarian relations, countering police-like hierarchies that silence the subaltern. So here in this story, Abdul Jabbar's merchant of Sagar Island relationally poeticizes the Sundarban's mute tidal archive, mangrove vines, race-afflicted crew bodies, ethically testifying Torab's betrayal, redistributing scenes from sparse merchant reticence to the jungle's ruined depth. So equalizing human-animal perils in a syncretic sensorium. Next. In my another story, the merchant of Paradise, Behester Saudagar. To some extent, it's a different in terms of the presentation of the story or the ideas. Here we can see in this story set in a very rural village. We see the commodification of fate as Saiful, the protagonist, he has a polio crippled daughter, Marjina, and another character, Haji Syed, who lures this daughter by Saiful is a sporadic faith lover. He offers prayer only in Juma. And one day in Juma, he hears Islamic sermons from Maulana about Jannat, hurs, milk of paradise, and he was somehow excited. And he could not amalgamate the Jannah and the earth. And the Haji Sahib, Haji Asgar, his gaze falls on the polio-ridden daughter. And Haji Asgar, who lures this daughter by saying that if this daughter is sent to Hajj for begging, it will be better. It will work on two ways. She will get some blessings from people and also money. So here the commodification of faith in terms of, next slide please, in terms of the pious predator, Haji Asgar's gaze and the lure of Hajj. So here we can see the radiant Maulavi, cosmic order, and when he speaks about the 18,000 souls from depths, Alhamdulillah, Kaaba's Gaibi, celestial voice, all these things somehow capitulates the mind of Saiful, the father of this daughter. So Saiful shares this Asgar, who do you want to go to her Hajj? And he invokes that, who does not want to go Hajj? So this is the very butter of innocence, Marjina's fortune and the unveiling of the scheme that subsequently she is throwing into the very perils of the danger of trafficking, though he is a husband. So here the cultural and the thematic layers, we can see the merchant Haji commodifying the disabled, priceless stones. Disabled, she can't speak, she can't stand erected, stand properly. So Saiful's you can call it Saiful's daughter's twisted leg is a metaphor of the cripples of the society. So here in Abdul Rauf's Merchant of Paradise, that is a decaying cluster of huts beside the village burial ground, impoverished Safil and his family. Here, Marjina endures a silent isolation on Haji Asgar. Now, what I am saying is that the Merchant of Paradise, here muteness and silence manifest as the visceral indictments of subaltern erasure within the hypocritical religious economy. So, Haj's performative piety reduced her to a bargaining chip. And here also we can see Hajj is a marketplace for devout's indulgence at the expense of the deformed. Got it? So, Rauf, the writer, subverts the muteness from victimhood to ethical witness. Who is the ethical witness? I am going to the next point. Please, next slide, please. Here, poetics of witnessing that I discussed now. That poetics of witnessing, that is, reframes the silence not as an absence or the failure of voice, but an ethical practice. That the readers who reads, he or she also takes some part in this witnessing. Poetics that actively bears a witness to trauma through what remains unsaid or mutely expressed. Got it? So here we can see the story also serves as a moral imperative to testify to the experience like gendered violence and the erasure without fully resolving the commodifying them. So Marjina's literal muteness never spoke a word, the writer said, serves as a kind of poetics that indicates the commodification of her disabled body and the filial betrayal, patriarchal hypocrisy that highlights the gendered violence trafficking in the daughters as beggars for Hajj alms. If I take this to a Fanonian colonial gauge and carries the body in pain, then it would be better where we can see the objectification of the colonized body as a spectacle of inferiority and the psychic alienation, the muteness, and in Ellen's carries the body in pain that explains how physical torment renders the reader to take part or the suffering itself is a voice. Where we can also see the in this story that illustrates the Marjina's twisted leg gazed upon predatorily by Haji Asgar as a priceless stone for arms trafficking. So Fanos alienated spectacle merging with Scary's unmade world to ethically expose face commodification. Next slide, please. In my next story, Qasid by Abul Basar. Abul Basar, this story is translated by Sipra Mukherjee, who teaches at the Barasa State University, English department, and Ipsita Haldar. Both of them. So here we get the idea of the protagonist called Qasim Qureshi. He's a dark-skinned orphan. He came from Bangladesh, and now he also claims that he also a descendant of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam's Quraysh clan. And he arrives as a refugee, and he has some violent, haunted past. But he has crossed the border fleeing police warrant, and somehow Qasim befriends Nainihal, the nominal Sia from Nasipur, and the story builds towards Sakina and Qasim wedding full moon night and Gai Hulu, we call it Gai Hulu, the turmeric ceremony that symbolizes auspicious beginning. And in flashback, we can see Qasim's proving his Sia identity during Muharram processions, Matam. And this Matam was marked by Nainihal for his Sunni-like attire and doubted lineage, whether he belongs to that lineage or not. I mean Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam's lineage. So here, tension peaks on the wedding eve, and Nainihal's jealous treacherous arrives with the disguised Dulduli with a troop of Jari singers. So their laments, I mean the lamentations of the Sias, disrupt the joyous rituals, transforming the bridal courtyard into a site of mourning. So in this frenzy, Qasim delirious from blood, and we can see the Nainihal marriage Sakina at dawn. So in this story, we can see that, next slide please, the tension simmers in the Sia Sunni together, no conflict, and the Jari song and the so-called mourning of Sias, all these are placed side by side. But the thing is that the tale ends on an ambiguity. Qasim as eternal Qasid, I mean farrier, messenger. Qasid means messenger, courier. So here Muharram procession participates carrying offerings. I mean partisans Qasim as a bearer of doom tidings. His love a fatal dispose from a history's margins. So if we see this from the Islamic perspective, from Islamic lens, particularly Shia Majlis tradition, Karbala, lamentation, silence, muteness in Qasid are not mere absence of speech, rather sabr, rather profound theological cultural register of sabr, the patience, taqiyya, concealment of survival, and the ineffable of divine mystery, gaib. So the silent scream of Ahle Bahat, Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu household, Hussein's unspoken agony, all these are there. That mixes with this story by saying that Basar extend this to Bengali Muslim syncretism, where Sunni Jari song breaks the silence of the rhythmic elegy. Yet the story's core tension lies in the unsaid, the untold trauma. So in this story, we can see the planetarizing the Karbala's mythic silence through the Qasim's self-flagellating matam by collapsing his untimely death and echoing modernist experiment with the so-called where Shia Sunni hybridity witnesses the decolonization's incomplete freedom. I mean, if we go to the relational poetics of silence, then Basar's Qasid extended to Qasim's slashed body or matam body as a relational ruin, its bloodied matam ethically linking personal exile to Karbala's mythic unsayability, where the full moon courtyard becomes a sensible space for equalizing Shia lament, Sunni wedding joys in syncretic testimony. So Basar's Qasid, Qasim's bleeding body during matam, becomes a mute object. Its slashed chest testifying to Karbala's unsayable thirst and partisans' refugee traumas, relating to Shia elegy, to Sunni villageable life. All this witness the mourner. So the poetics here is that late modernism's planetary term. I mean, in this story, Qasim's refugee matam during the procession extend this planetary modernism by linking Karbala's mythic silence, mythic thirst, not silence, mythic thirst, to partisans' border crossing. And also brings about a voice long sidelined by empire's cartographic bias. So here we also get the incorporation of the South Asian syncretism. Next slide, please. In my next story, The Boundary, A. Murshid, here the writer speaks about a character called so-called Liaquat Hussain. He's a middle-aged Muslim bookseller at Sanchita bookstore, College Street, and he lives in alienating his Muslimness by hiding his Muslimness, masking his faith, because he is from Bangladesh and somehow people, he imagines the very riots of Bangladesh, partition, 1964 riots, all these things made him to hide his Muslimness only to amalgam or mixes with the other communities, because in this Liaquat feels sympathy and agrees the low price to Hindu families, Hindu sellers, and we also see that somehow this person is asset of his own community, and he pasted the very images of Lakshmi and Ganesh so that people don't understand his community. So another couple, another person called Hogan, who is also he's a Hindu people from Bangladesh. He somehow understands that Liaquat is from Bangladesh, and they share their own grief and silences. So here, silence in this story is not passive or a passive void, rather a performative sukut. So Murshid, the writer A. Murshid, employs silence here as a double bind. I mean, redemptive in micro moments and cross-communal empathy. Next slide, please. So here, muteness, subaltern's eraser and unheard trauma, and Murshid the so-called Colestic market and the bookstore is a microcosm of neoliberal India's commodified identities. And we can see the enduring divides regarding the CAA or the NRC debates. So here the title Liakat's concealed, boundary, we can see the Liakat's concealed identity as a Muslim in the Hindu majority market. And the images of Ganesh, Lakshmi on the walls of his bookstore, all these things somehow brings about the titular weight through the Liakat's compromisation and the resolution, critically, the borders on sentimental humanism crossing over the asymmetries. What I discussed later on, that Liakat's concession and his softness toward the Hindu people, and this boundary is not a solid one, rather a porous one in terms of privileging the negotiation, and tells brevity economic haggling foreshadows identitarian revelation, but it risks reducing the ethics to anecdote, undercutting the deeper partisan narrative. So here we get a glimpse of the India's enduring divide, CA, NRC debates. Next slide, please. If we go to the post-colonial theory's blind spots, that Anna Barnard, Ziad Ilmar Safi, in their book called What Post-Colonial Theory Does Not Say, published in 2015 by Routledge, that identifies here that everything, they speak about everything, they say that post-colonial theory, they did not give importance on, or their over-reliance on hybridity, mimicry, Homi Bhava, but they do it at the expense of religious ethics and neglect of intra-minority dynamics like Islamic jurisprudence agency. All these things are there. So though they speak about the Zimbabwe and the capitalistic and the materialist conditions, but what post-colonial theory does not say, that is nothing but the reliance on, or the discussion on, the religious ethics and the intra-minority dynamics. So here in this story, Liakat's market mimicry, hiding communal outrage to conceal his Muslimness, and it exposes a theory's blind spot to sever as understand as a kind of resistance. His kinship with Khogen, not with the other Muslim people. All these things, what Ilmar Safi and Anna Barnard call religion's unsaid ontologies. That and Khogen and all, and the Liakat, all these people, they speak about 1964 riots, and they are envy of each other. So here we see the next slide, please. In my next story, Baradar Islam, Niharul Islam. So here in Baradar Islam, in this story, we see in a village mosque, there is a declaration or a announcement by saying that Baradar Islam, Assalamu Alaikum. It announced a religious gathering at Kiramat Ali Sahib's house to raise money. So Rabia Puri, who is being shown as a beggar, but it goes to the previous story, or the flashback tells that the name Kiramat hits Rabia like a punch. Once a lowly thief and close friend of her husband Ikram, and how he dare call himself Sahib now. So here the transformation from thief to Sahib, and Rabia was Ikram returned from work trips to Kiramat, because Rabia waited a week after her marriage, knowing deep down her husband's met a thief end, beaten to death like Abdul, a burglar, and years after of grief turned Rabia into a beggar. So here, theoretically, it embodies, the Baradar Islam embodies the widow beggar's ontological eraser. Next slide, please. And the so-called Islamically, it evokes the sabr, the patience, and the silence as a divine dialogue, as per Rumi. And the so-called authentic taqwa, God-fearing piety. here, aphosis, I mean the speaking through negation or what cannot be said, and negative theology by also incorporating the Derrida's logic of absence, where deferral of meanings create traces without fixed presence, and Maurice Blanchard's neuter silence. A neutral impersonal void disrupts narrative closure. So Baradari Islam, Elder Rabia, evening silence and the Mahfil's amplified urges emphatically traces the divine mercy through absences. And the Rabia's limping form, Margina's polio twisted leg, all these things speak more about the unmade world of poverty blows and the architecture of the silence. In the next slide, please. In the another story is called Falling. I will take only 5 to 7 minutes more. Falling Apart, Hasir Moli. Here we can see the story of an engineer who was born and brought up in foreign country, but somehow his father's wish is that he will try to make his son Hafiz, so that he can trespass the divine for 7 years, or he will get some benefit from the divine intervention. So here you can see that this person, he is a apostate son of this man, Hafiz Muhammad Yaqub, and his daughter Minu, Laila, his wife Laila, Alaka, Minu, and the spectral maternal figures, all of them are there, only to ask that this person's first Hindu love is discarded for refusing interfaith elopement. Laila, his wife, the complaint wife, embodies the subaltern coerced hybridity, because Laila always tried to take her husband into her own side. But when she finds that her husband is not doing the same thing, then she renounces her own Muslimness or Muslim identity by not praying to Almighty Allah or not invoking God. So here also we can see Minu or Yasmin, the third generation hybrid. Next slide, please. Where we can see the glimmers of resistance and the critiques of limits of inherited patriarchy. They use religion as a gender sword, because here this lady Minu, the daughter, she has some kind of affair with the Tapas, but somehow Tapas is coming to Minu for the sake of, not for the sake of religion, but this lady is trying to take him by saying that I can't go to that religion. So here religion as gender sword, use a gender sword, and the kind of Syed's discursive erasure. I mean, this story silences operate contrapunctually. What Edward Syed says, that Muslim in interiors from Hindu majority gaze, and your daughter, when this Yaqub's daughter elopes, the neighbor said that your daughter has the run away with a Bengali guy. So Muslim peoples are not Bengali. So exposing the Orientalist biases that render Muslims not Bengali or human. So Imtiaz professional muteness, unopened files, unshared sufferings, and when there is a at the end the janaza scene, when Haji Sahib's son somehow takes part in the father's janaza by invoking Ayat al-Kursi. So the villagers called him Munafiq. Munafiq. It's a kind of pietist gatekeeping. Got it? And the so-called silence here as an insurgent episteme. So in Falling Apart, Abbas slur, Imtiaz confessions, Minu's disconnection, that reaches a huge blow to communal souls. But these are the postulate theories, blind spots. And next slide. Next slide. In the Water of Zamzam by Ansaruddin, here we can see the Haji Syed, who thinks that the Zamzam water can cure asthma and all the disease by having some Zamzam water. And the incident of the incident of the so-called Jamjam water, it was contaminated with the dung and all these things because Haji Sahib was not aware of this, that it was placed outside his room, and somehow Haji Sahib says that Idris Ali, that he's a ragged peasant who wishes to get some Jamjam water only to cure his bullock. So the Haji Sahib answered that bullock does not have iman. Does he invoke Allah? So all these things, the surviving bullocks, anguished, hollow, rain the air, and the next slide. Okay, fine. So I'm speaking about the democratization of the piety and the silences that perpetuate epistemic silence. So here the water of Jamjam that renders the silence and a faith contaminated aquifer somehow seeping through the cracks and critically summoning the eco-Islamic articulations on Bengal's voiceless furrows and it sees piety as a precarious panacea and re-territorializing the aphosis in negative theology. Got it? And in my last one and the last story, and I'm going to conclude it now. Afsar Ahmad, the story called My Elating Bestie by Afsar Ahmad. Afsar Ahmad, I met Afsar Ahmad in his home. So Afsar Ahmad here in this story speaks about a lady from Barashat, 19-year-old Hasina Ali Khan, a bright young wife, ranked in 17 higher secondary exams, arrives at a Barasat BPO training center, surrounded in black burqa. Only her visible eyes are there, expressive eyes, and with her father-in-law Samiruddin and her husband toils in Kuwait. So this is the story line, and we can see the manager there, the lady, and all the peers somehow they gossip about this lady by calling that how come this lady attuned to this black burqa, and all these things are there. So my elating bestie, it's a kind of veiled Muslim woman's epistemic silence in the global capitalism case. So the BPO office at Barasat, that is a modern marketplace for panopticon, or you can call it a modern India's liberal place, where the so-called ideas, next slide, so-called ideas of Georgia Agamben's Musalman, the camp's living dead, that reduced to a bare life through utter passivity. And this frames the story's invisibility. By embodying the Hasina's burqa discard bars and sisterhood chants at the latter, and at the latter of the story, at the end of the story, we can see that this lady is coming out as a resilient hybrid where silences, pities, mask insurgent potentials, and the risk of romanticizing stasis between the testimonial urgency and narrative contamination. So, next slide. Yes. Here in my 9 stories, I have tried to bring out that or dissected the so-called silences poetics. How silences and the monologic grip of post-colonial nationalism in terms of spectral division and the planetarizing modernism straits into syncretic suburb and the bare life, commodified hypocrisy, all these things gesture towards a relational poetics that redistributes the sensible towards subaltern insurgency. And it also makes us to think that beyond the silence and the muteness, we forge a ethical void, a cacophonous third space, where Bengals stayed on hybrids, not only witnessing the satyr, the borders of belonging, rather questioning this noise of unfinished justice. Thank you very much. If you have any question,
Thanks, Professor Sagir, for very good, provocative lecture. We try to understand the write-ups, 10 write-ups, in a critical perspective. Try to linkage the write-up from a theoretical perspective also. It's very good. I hope in future you will write so many critical essays like this. Now the session is open for questions. Anyone can ask any question. Yeah.
First of all, my name is Abdul. I am coming from Assam. I am doing graduation in economics from Guwahati University. First of all, I will say I am not matching your topic to this today national conference, but I have some question. As you mentioned, the Musalman, how you describe the term Musalman? As you are saying in, I think in your question number 2, the term Musalman you describe. How you describe Musalman? That's the first question. And the second, I think, written by Siraj Mustafa. So, what is the insightful talk? What the writer want to say to the people? As you were topping that story, the Bengali writers was translating that. So, what the writer want to say in this matter? And third question is this: what is the contribution of this writing to this contemporary experience of Bengali Muslims in their contemporary India for their engagement and development in Islamic ethics? And second, you are saying the meaning of the Qasim. What the actual meaning of the Qasim? And you also describing the event of Karbala. This also belongs to the Qasim dynasty of prophets. You are saying the Munafiq. What is the exact meaning of Munafiq? Who are the Munafiq? If someone is reciting this ayatul kursi behind the Quran, he will be Munafiq or not? There's no question. And last one, you are using in all, I think in all your stories, the silence. Silence, you are using the silence. What, I don't know, I didn't understand what means the silence you want to try in this audience. These are the questions.
First of all, I'd like to thank you for putting up these questions. The title of my lecture is The Muted Muslims, or the Silence. I deal with the theme of silence. Whether Bengali Muslims are muted or not. This was the very question. So by taking up so many stories, especially 9 stories, I deal with the theme of silence. How these Muslims are entered into the very panopticon called silence. Got it? Number 1. And the thing is that you asked me the question. What is your first question? Musalman, yes. So the thing is that when Agamben uses the term Musalman, he invokes the very idea of the Jews and with the Musalman. That Musalman was a kind of slang during that time. That was a non-being. It's a kind of slang that they are non-human, non-being. He has no nationality, no identity, bare life. In terms of that, got it? And the second question.
Your first story, in those names the cow is slaughtered.
Yes.
But the inside writer want to tell to us what the inside to.
Yeah. Thing is that in this story the cow is slaughtered. Here the cow is slaughtered. Here he performs kurbani in the name of Allah because he is a pious human being. But underneath the society we can see the Haji Syed who offers him food from the Jamidar's family. This food was somehow contaminated in terms of not pious. Or the cow itself is an unslaughterable sacred. That cow cannot be slaughtered because he is not his cow. Rather, it's a kind of more than a filial bond. Got it? So the story is that what is sacred? Earlier in my talk, the professor he told about that not only offering namaz, prayer, invoking Allah. These are not only the thing that we invoke, that we should perform. There are so many things beyond this, to stand by people, to help others. These are the more favorable things according to Hadith and to Almighty Allah. Got it? What I'm saying is that through this story, we understand that the cow to this person Harai is not only a cow. Rather, it's a kind of unslaughterable sacred that cannot be slaughtered. And if you can slaughter him, then the meat should not be offered to this person. Am I right to you? Yes. Third question.
Connection of this.
Yes, silence here, the connecting bond is that. Here the trekking towards home is that this man is a middle class labor, somehow disconnected with the society. That he is a bare man. No one understands his piety. No one understands his sacredness. That's his bond with the cow. So here the silent is remanent with the colonial era's passivity with economic precarity. Got it? Yes. Third question. Qasid means messenger. The messenger who gives some message. This is the meaning of the Qasid. So here Qasid means this person gives some message that I am invoking Hussein's martyr. And I am like that. Got it? So here the story writer invokes or asking the question whether Shia Sunni stay side by side or not.
I think the meaning of Qasid, I think, chahne wala.
No, Qasid means Qasid. Qasid
I
is
think
messenger,
the
the
noun
courier.
is actually not the real English. I think it's Arabic term. Qasid.
I know it's Arabic term.
So that's mean the Qasid is Arabic term. I think it will mean I think.
It's not chahane wala. It means messenger, courier. Qasid, 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 Arabic term. It means messenger, courier. Here the message is that how he performs the message, the performative activity, the silence, how the silence of self-flagellation performs the message, performs as a courier. Got it? During the courtyard of Shia family, where Jari sons were there. So how both Jari song and the Matam, all these are two placed side by side. Next question.
I think we should finish.
Yes. See, Qasid means messenger. Yes. Yes, it's okay. Yes. Any other question? Yes, please go ahead.
No, I got my.
Okay, thank you. Yes, sure.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. One question.